So, Andrew, defense of a pet does not qualify for use of deadly force in a self-defense situation, right?
Unfortunately, not in the state of Maryland.
But what if my dog identifies as my child?
I'm Duane Urban, and welcome to the Urban Defense Podcast, featuring discussion on firearms, concealed carry, self-defense, the law, and much more. Designed to inform, educate, increase your survival in a critical incident. This is Season 1, Episode 9, and the third video in our Survival Skills series. Welcome to the Urban Defense Podcast. I'm Duane Urban. Along with me is co-host attorney Andrew Saller from Saller, Lord, Ernstberger, and Inslee. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing use of force in your home, outside, in public, etc. What you can do, what you can't do, and some tips on how to protect yourself legally. Our returning guest today is Vinnie Noto, co-founder and president of On-Site Protection. Thanks for joining us again, Vinnie.
Good evening, Andrew. Good evening, Duane. Thank you for having me back.
Good evening, Vinnie.
Yes, good evening indeed. And Vinnie, why don't you introduce our new guest?
Well, today I have my lovely girlfriend accompanying me. Her name is Gevenny.
Gevenny, thank you for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. So I grew up in New Jersey, but I moved to Maryland in 2010. I lived in the county mostly and then moved to the city a couple years ago, right around the time I met Vinnie.
And you got involved in a critical incident with him, if I remember correctly, one of the ones that he spoke to us about on a previous podcast.
Correct. And that prompted me to become a gun holder myself. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, so I was familiar with weapons. I just didn't feel a need till I moved to the city.
And until you had that wonderful experience. Welcome to
Correct.
Baltimore.
Gevenny, what's your everyday carry?
It's a Glock 43X.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about use of force. And during classes, we discuss that topic in detail. But I think most people would agree that it can be a complex topic, which is the reason for this episode. So let's break it down into categories and simplify things. Public places, someone else's property or business, your business or your property outside of your home, and inside of your home. But before we do, let's define deadly force and non-deadly force. So for our listeners, deadly force is that amount of force reasonably calculated to cause death or serious bodily harm. Non-deadly force is that amount of force which is not reasonably calculated to cause death or serious bodily harm, such as shoving, kicking, physical strikes, or those things not likely to cause serious injury or death. In Maryland, deadly force may only be used to protect yourself or someone else for fear of serious bodily injury or death, and deadly force may not be used to protect property only. And you must be able to articulate, meaning put into words, the justification for your use of deadly force in such a way that a reasonable and prudent person would understand. So, Andrew, we have something in Maryland called the pattern jury instructions, do we not?
We do indeed.
So for our listeners, what is that?
In Maryland, if you are so lucky to be seated on a criminal jury, you and 12 other people and a couple alternates are going to listen to probably several days of testimony. And you'll see exhibits, you'll see physical evidence, and at the end of that, the judge will instruct you as to the law in Maryland. In an effort to standardize what the jurors hear is the law in Maryland, the pattern jury instructions were created. And a group gets together every year, reviews the law, reviews developments in the common law, meaning the case law that comes out, and tweaks and comes out with a book of the pattern jury instructions. And if theoretically in any normal case in Maryland, if you are tried, that is going to be what the judge will instruct the jury the law of the state of Maryland is, and they are to apply the facts to the law.
So the judge reads these things to them, or they're given a paper with that on them, or something in between?
At the very least, the judge is going to read it to them. Almost every judge I've ever practiced in front of will also give them a written copy as well, and some judges will even give them a tape recording of the judge instructing them as to the law.
So, Andrew, the Maryland pattern jury instructions are broken into sections, a couple of which are going to be relevant to what we're talking about today, and some of them won't be. Which ones are we going to be talking about, and would you be so kind as to read what they actually say?
We're going to mainly be focusing on 501, defense of others, 502, defense of habitation, and 507, self-defense. The big one that's going to apply to most people in most situations in Maryland is going to be 507. And in order for you to be found not guilty of assaultive crimes, think first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, is that you will have to fulfill each and every element of self-defense in Maryland. In Maryland, 4 main factors for self-defense. You can't be the aggressor. And if you are the initial aggressor, you can't be the one who escalates the situation to the deadly force level. Number 2, you have to believe that you are in an imminent or immediate danger of bodily harm. 3, your belief has to be reasonable. And 4, you use no more force than necessary to defend yourself in light of the threatened or actual harm.
Understood. And that's going to be for defense of self.
Yes,
Now, there are also instructions on defense of others, correct?
absolutely.
What do those instructions read?
Very similar. You have to actually believe the person that you were defending was in immediate or imminent danger of bodily harm. Your belief has to be reasonable. You use no more force than reasonably necessary in light of the threatened or actual force. And the purpose in using force was to aid the person you were defending.
I guess they threw that one in there so that you don't hunt down your ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend and then say they were in a fight and start a deadly force confrontation with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But we see the word reasonable keep popping up. It's reasonableness is the litmus test here.
Absolutely. And it's a soft, squishy, subjective standard.
Understood. So the third one that we were going to look at is defensive habitation, correct?
Yes.
And would you read that for us?
There you're going to have to show that someone attempted to enter or did enter your home, that you believed that person intended to commit a crime that would involve an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. You reasonably believed that the person intended to commit such a crime. The defendant believed the force that you used was necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily harm, and the defendant reasonably believed the force was necessary.
Understood. And it says in there not only entered, but attempted to enter. So in that instance, if someone is trying to kick down your door and you believe that they're coming in to cause some sort of great bodily harm, but yet they haven't made it through, it would sound like you may be protected.
You absolutely would be if you fulfilled every object of the test. Yes.
And Andrew, the duty to retreat in all but habitation has to be met.
Yes. Deadly force is reasonable if the defendant actually had a reasonable belief that the aggressors posed this kind of threat to them. And in Maryland, whenever you use deadly force, with the exception of in your home or in your dwelling, the defendant is required to make a reasonable effort to retreat.
So let's go ahead and start with public places. What are some guiding principles or best practices with public places? I guess let's define what a public place is. Obviously, we're going to break things down a little bit, but in my mind, this is going to be you're traveling on roadways and other public areas. We're not on someone else's property or your own property. You're in an area that is for sole use of the public.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to using deadly force in public, your recommendations?
Try to retreat if at all possible.
And, you know, the duty to retreat, and I talk about this in classes, is there to prevent people from making the situation worse, for inserting themselves into a situation that they may not belong in or may exacerbate, when it is the police's job to go in and handle it, where they have specialized training, they have specialized tools and things like that, that could help them to mitigate the situation instead of escalate it.
Absolutely. If you witness, as horrible as it is, a domestic violence situation that has not risen to serious bodily harm, drawing your pistol and intervening is the absolute wrong thing to do.
In Maryland, you have the ability to come to someone else's aid, but there is no good Samaritan law in Maryland that requires you to come to someone's aid, which means you can essentially just leave and be a good witness, right?
Absolutely. You are not compelled to take any action.
So Andrew, let's go ahead and start the conversation with public places. I don't know.
So in Maryland, unless it is your dwelling, it is a public place. That's it. The castle doctrine, and we'll get into that a little bit later, only applies to your dwelling. So anywhere else you are in Maryland, the rules of self-defense, as I enumerated, as described by the Maryland Pattern Jury Instruction, are what would apply. So wherever you are, in a Kmart, do they even still have Kmarts?
I think
there's
do.
one left.
There
in
might be
existence.
one, yeah.
Okay. If you're in the one last Kmart, duty to retreat. In the Kmart parking lot, duty to retreat. On the road, duty to retreat. In your neighbor's front lawn, duty to retreat.
So that brings up a very interesting point. What about inside of your neighbor's house?
Duty to retreat because it's not your dwelling.
But what do we need before we can go in there per Maryland law?
Permission from them to have your firearm there with you. Thank you, Senate Bill 1.
Yes, in advance, a notarized letter signed by the king.
In blood.
Yes, so make sure that you have that permission before you go in there. So, okay, public places, not unlike what Vinnie described in the previous podcast about his incident. It occurred on a public street. He was approached outside of his house. This is a public place.
How did you feel during this encounter?
It was simultaneously the scariest and safest I've ever felt, thanks
Explain.
to Vinnie.
Yeah, explain. I'm curious.
Because his reaction was so quick and correct that it made me trust in him as my protector since I was unarmed. And he just acted as soon as he knew the threat was there.
If Vinnie hadn't been there, what would you have done?
Here's my bike. And then run away.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, you really don't have a whole lot of options. I mean, it's we look for a moment of opportunity, but when you don't have a firearm,
You have
your
no
opportunities,
opportunity.
they're very limited, very
Right.
limited. Okay, so what about, so Andrew, you said that inside of the home, it's a little bit different. So let's get to that, and then I think we can kind of have some more general discussion on the topic.
So inside of the home, it's going to be in Maryland, as I'm sure people are well aware, the castle doctrine. And the duty to retreat does not extend from your own dwelling. Now, this is going to be an area where it's not going to be as self-evident as people think, and it's going to be much narrower than people think. There is one case, if you were engaged to your fiance and you were over at her house that evening and an intruder broke in and you did not intend to stay the night, do you have a duty to retreat?
In theory, I would suppose you do, because it says where you're a lodger or someone that is staying there, but it's going to be an overnight stay. Am I wrong?
So as defined, dwelling is going to encompass a lot of places that you may not think of. It's going to include your home. It's going to include the curtilage of your home. Curtilage is a tricky legal theory that based on a period in time where you had your house, you would have a kitchen not inside the house. You'd have a stable to keep your horse in.
Outhouse.
An outhouse. All of that would be your curtilage.
So other than in colonial America today, does curtilage extend to your backyard if there's not an outhouse that you're going to?
Probably not.
So your backyard with your fire pit or your grill or something like that, we're talking about inside, physically inside of your dwelling.
Yes, but if you had a detached garage or something like that, that would definitely be within the curtilage, and it gets to be a sticky spot if you're walking in between your house and your detached garage and the bad guy appears.
Okay, so castle, best case scenario, inside of your dwelling, outside of your dwelling with a lot of gray area.
It would also include your hotel room and your hotel room and all the non-common areas of hotels and motels.
So common areas being the main lobby, hallways, elevators, things like that.
Correct. And it would get very sticky. I would not want to necessarily litigate this case, but if you go to some nicer hotels and there is a business lounge in the hotel where only people on the 8th floor are allowed to use that business lounge, and an intruder or someone escalates a situation to a deadly force level, do you have a duty to retreat if you're in the 8th floor executive lounge?
I would say if it's open to public people, maybe not the entire public, but to other people, maybe that wouldn't.
It's going to be sticky.
Because you're technically, if it's a private lounge, it's a members only, right? So like you have to have the Amex Platinum to get in there.
So is that a common element or a non-commonly accessible element?
I feel like it's non-common because it's private, it's members only, and it would fall under what is the hotel's policy there.
I would say it would be very conditional. It would be situational, and it would be litigated as such. There's not going to be any hard and fast rule on that.
I agree. And in Maryland, we defined dwelling place as any part of a building actually used for residential purposes, temporarily or permanently.
And that would extend not only to the person that owns the house, but to anyone that lives there and lays their head there, to include if someone was spending the night there, a friend of yours or something like that, they could then invoke COUNSEL if they had to use deadly force in your dwelling.
Yes.
What about, we hear people talk about defense of a business. Let's say you own a business and you're inside of your business. Does COUNSEL extend to the business, your business?
You are asking a very good question, Duane. And right here at the end of the pattern jury instructions, although some jurisdictions do not impose a duty to retreat at one's place of business, this issue has not been addressed in Maryland.
So you can be the guinea pig,
Yes.
essentially.
Yes.
So we're waiting for case law.
Yes. And case law only comes if you lose at trial.
Understood.
So
I guess that's why we call it arguing the facts.
yes. So it's unclear if you're listening and someone comes into your business, and if hypothetically you're a business with security glass and you have no other patrons that could be in danger, I think you might have a duty to retreat or to not use deadly force.
Yeah, I agree.
But if it was your home, if all the other factors were present, you could use deadly force. Just because it's your home, you just don't have the duty to retreat. All the other factors apply.
Now, COUNSEL protects you in the sense that it removes duty to retreat in those situations enumerated. However, does it also give you a degree of civil protection in your dwelling if all the other factors are met?
Yes.
So what does that mean? It means they can't sue you? What does it mean?
That if they tried to sue you and your actions were reasonable, you would be victorious.
Understood. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of uses of force. Now that we've kind of broken down the different places and stuff, let's kind of talk about the different types of force. So it's easy enough to use deadly force. It's never easy, but let's just say the decision-making process is maybe a little more simple when you're getting off of your bicycle in front of your house and someone's got a pistol aimed at you, yelling epitaphs and other things, telling you to get on the ground or give up your wallet or something like that. That's an easier decision to make, certainly if they're firing shots at you and stuff. But where people start getting into the weeds is when we start getting into other types of weapons and situations. So we talk about edged weapons in our classes, and we talk about the 21-foot rule, which isn't a rule, but it was a training standard that was developed in a police department. And they determined that within 21 feet, if someone has an edged weapon, they can get to you and start poking holes in you before you can get pull your weapon and get fire on that person, or in some cases, even if your weapon's out, to be able to put fire on that person. And simply put, it takes more than one round to stop a determined aggressor. Physiologically, our reaction is delayed to gunfire in many cases because we're under high stress, adrenaline, drug and alcohol influences, extreme anger, but even the fact that some people are just plain crazy. And, we have something now that we didn't have 20 years ago with the internet. You can see videos of law enforcement shootings, and in some cases, civilian shootings, where multiple rounds and a mag change are needed to stop a determined aggressor. So edged weapons, I always tell people, when you're in that fear, you're going to need to mitigate the threat. And we shoot to do what? What's our goal? We don't shoot to kill, right?
No.
Shoot to stop the threat.
We shoot to stop the threat. And that may take a number of rounds. And I'm going to shoot the threat until the threat has stopped doing whatever it was doing that made me shoot it in the first place. And remember, we don't shoot people, we shoot behaviors. So what was the behavior that they were exhibiting that put me in that level of fear of either very serious bodily injury or death? Doesn't mean that the person's knife has to be in my flesh, but not quite to the aorta yet before I can use that force. I just have to have that fear. Counselor, agreement, disagreement?
I agree with you generally. And you got to remember, a knife is always loaded. At the same time, so much of this, as we hit on earlier, is going to be the totality of the circumstances, and it's going to be a squishy, subjective standard. Just because the guy has broken into your house and is asleep on your couch with a knife doesn't mean as soon as you see him, you can open up.
It's going to be conditional depending on the totality of what's happening.
Everything. Yeah, you are going to be Monday morning quarterbacked. Number 3, was your belief reasonable? And everyone else, those 12 jurors, are going to interject their own personal and life experiences and say, is that reasonable? Are you going to have one juror who's going to say, well, just because he pulled the knife out, who knows what he was going to do with it? Were they arguing? Were they threatening one another? Was it clear as day he was wearing a mask and saying this is a robbery? Or is he saying, oh, my knife is dull. Do you know where I can find a nice sharpener? The odds of that happening are slim, but you're dealing with 12 people that are on the jury. They are judging you.
And so, it also comes down to proximity. So, is the person with the knife arguing with the person acting crazy right next to them in a situation to where they could very easily hurt them and they're exhibiting behaviors that would indicate to you that they're intend to do that? Or is the person across the parking lot? Because that is a big deal.
Huge.
Yeah. So,
Huge.
And the same applies to blunt force weapons, things like bats and crowbars and pipes. I had a class, and I don't know if we talked about this in previous podcasts, but I had a class where there was an individual in there, and he had gone to another instructor for something else, and I don't remember how he found us. But at any rate, he told me when we got into this section of the class, he said, my instructor told me is if they don't have a gun, forget about even shooting them or ever shooting them because you're going to end up in prison. And I said, hold on, pause for a second. What you're saying then is that if the person has a bat and I don't have a bat, then I have to say, hold on, sir, go get a bat and then sword fight this guy? That's absurd.
I absolutely agree.
So it comes down to, can you articulate? And I said to the guy, I said, could I take a bat or a pipe or a wrench or some other large blunt force object and crush your skull in with it? Yes. If the answer is yes, and if you were in fear for that, then they brought a bat to a gunfight.
Yes. And then back to just once again, you're going to be judged. Could you retreat? Who was the aggressor in this situation?
But again, all of these situations, as we talk about in the classes, are going to be conditional, and it's going to be based on a number of factors, right? It's going to be, what is the weapon? What are they doing? What is your proximity to them, or what is their proximity to the person that they're attacking? Obviously, if we have two people fighting each other and they're both bodybuilders and they're both big guys or whatever, it might be a different situation than we have a guy with a bat attacking a little old lady and trying to break her arms and legs. And I think that it's going to be conditional. And I think in that situation, me personally, once I've determined what's happening and I'm in fear for serious bodily injury or death to that person, I'm probably going to take that action, but you're not required to.
Yeah, and I think what I'm trying to say is like it's so important for people that, especially concealed carry holders and people that do choose to carry a gun every day, is you're likely to come across the situation, depending on where you live, I suppose, but I can almost guarantee if you live in Baltimore City, within a 5-year window, you're going to come across one at least, if not multiple scenarios that we've described. But what's important to keep in mind is that you have literally seconds to this stuff that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. You're going to have like 15 thousandths of a second to analyze all that data, take it all in, process it, and make a conscious decision on what you should do. And that's what's important for people to understand, because your decision that you made in 1/10 of a second or 2/10 of a second is going to be played back 1,000 times by a prosecutor, by a jury, and they're going to sit there and they're going to go, well, he could have did this, he could have did that.
Absolutely. And make sure you gather all the information you can before you make a decision. And remember, you are not the police. Deadly force is the last resort.
Right. And so again, to our listeners and everyone, I mean, it's going to be conditional. It's not cut and dried all the time. There is no one manual that says in every situation you will do this. It comes down to, was what you did reasonable? Did you use no more force than the exigency required? Was your actual attempt in that situation, or your goal, to defend that person from serious bodily injury or death? And to what Andrew was saying, if we're all out somewhere and we see two individuals in an argument and one of them has a giant pipe wrench down at his side while they're yelling at each other, no, I'm not going to draw my weapon and shoot that individual. If that individual then starts attacking that person, I've still got to take in what's happening and determine what exactly am I seeing here. And then based upon that, if first off, let me just say, we can walk away. But if I determine that I'm in fear for that person's safety of serious bodily injury or death, then maybe deadly force is warranted in that situation. But a jury and a judge are going to be the ones that you sit before or stand before, and their interpretation of reasonable may be different than yours.
Yeah, that's like I tell everybody, I'm like, especially if you're actively carrying a weapon and you're out, and someone just wants to pick a fight with you just because let's not worry about the why. Let's just worry about that it's happening. And I tell everybody, I said, you have to be just completely standoff. You want to be on camera like this. Hey, I don't want a problem with you. Please back up. You want to be like this.
Well, you know what? That brings up a really good point, though. So let's take physical weapons out of the equation, the objects of weapons out of the discussion, and let's talk about personal weapons. Let's talk about hands and feet, right? So in those situations, deadly force may be warranted or it may not, but again, it's going to be conditional. And we look at things like your physical abilities versus the physical abilities of the attacker, prior knowledge of the attacker. Have you had encounters with this person before and you know them to be violent and dangerous towards you? Their proximity to weapons, of course, we took that away, so we've got hands and feet. And have you reached a point where you have exhausted all other reasonable options? If I'm in a shoving match with someone who's screaming at me, no, I'm probably not going to pull out my gun and shoot that individual. Me, if I get knocked onto the ground and that person is MMA bashing my head into the ground with his blows, and I'm in fear that he's going to cause serious injury to me or knock me out and be able to get a hold of my weapon, I think in that situation, deadly force would be warranted. And it's easier probably for you to have deadly force than it would be for him. So if Vinnie and I are in an altercation, we may be somewhat similarly matched. And the jury may say, well, you could have fought him off. But if I get a hold of you, and you might be a ninja, I don't know, but if I get you on the ground and I start punching your face in, could I cause serious bodily injury to you, potentially even death maybe?
Absolutely.
So would not deadly force be warranted in that situation? And I would articulate, I think, that it is. Andrew, thoughts on deadly force when it comes to hands and feet?
Absolutely. I hate to say it, to be the wet blanket lawyer, who was the initial aggressor that started the situation? If she hit you first and then was getting beat senseless, she would have a very difficult time then articulating, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, don't get me wrong, but then if she used deadly force,
it would make it a sticky situation.
And if it is mutual combat that started, it can never be perfect self-defense.
Now, with that said, I do know in the instructions, I think it does talk about if you were the initial aggressor, as long as you didn't raise the level to deadly force, then you may still be able to use deadly force as self-defense as a.
Correct. It says verbatim, the defendant was not the aggressor, or although the defendant was the initial aggressor, they did not raise the fight to the deadly force level. So this is really where you're going to get second guessed. If she punches you, you punch her back and your punch is much better than hers, and next thing you know, you're on top of her. At what point does it cross to just getting an ass kicking versus serious bodily harm?
Well, they would just say you were on top of her. Obviously, she was down. She was
Yeah.
no longer a threat, and you continued to pound her.
That I agree. Probably deadly force could be warranted,
Yeah.
but it's going to be much further down the timeline of the fight than right at just because, you know, you punched her and knocked her down. If she then pulls out a gun and shoots you, the fact that she punched you first will make it much stickier for self-defense.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying we can't win all these at the end of the day, but it is going to be a much greater uphill battle.
So the overarching theme is be reasonable and don't start fights.
Yes, that would be wonderful
Yeah,
advice.
especially if you're concealed carry, because the last thing I want to do is be rolling around in a fist fight with someone while I have a weapon on me, because, you know, the weapon could fall out, it could get loose, whatever the case may be. You know, your shirt gets pulled over your head and everybody sees that you're wearing it, and then everybody loves a good screaming during an incident. Oh my God, he's got a gun! Yeah, it's just all bad stuff that you want to avoid.
In our mind's eye, it's always going to be 1 versus 1, but reality has shown us that rarely do fights end up 1 versus 1.
No, not in Baltimore anyway.
Gevenny, as the only woman on this panel, under what circumstances would you most be concerned about self-defense and things of that nature?
So if I'm armed and the man that obviously physically overpowers me is attacking me, or I feel that he will attack me, or he has made verbal threats at me violently, and I'm in fear of my own life, am I allowed to draw?
Flesh it out a little bit more. Where are you? What's the circumstance?
Say I'm in his domicile.
Ooh, okay. Because in Maryland, the sticky point, anytime you draw a gun, unless it is perfect self-defense, that is a first-degree assault punishable by up to 25 years in the penitentiary. And the prosecutor almost certainly is going to throw on use of a firearm in a crime of violence, which carries another 5 to 20. So you're in his domicile and he's getting very aggressive. Just to be very blunt, are you concerned about a sexual assault or rape?
Possibly.
So that would be a felony that you are worried about defending yourself in. If you could properly articulate that his actions led you to, once again, going down the factors, that he's the aggressor, that you believed you were in immediate or imminent danger of bodily harm, and felonious rape would certainly be covered in that. Once again, the defendant's belief was reasonable. That's when the jury's going to second guess you. And you used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend yourself, you certainly could. And it begs the question, you know, when they're second guessing you, could you escape? Why couldn't you escape? And the comeback is, are you aware of the exit? Is the exit safe to get to?
What if he's blocking the exit?
So there we go. Then that prong would be satisfied. So if he's blocking the exit and his actions could be demonstrably shown to be causing a serious threat, you probably could draw your firearm.
And what if he has in the past inflicted bodily harm on me or sexual assault? Like, there's so many cases of women being killed by their significant others. You don't know. Like, as much as you may love that person, they might still be a killer, and you're just not aware of that.
You're bringing up some very good points. In Maryland, the general rule is if you are aware of the quote-unquote victim's propensity for violence, that would be admissible at trial. It's only admissible if you are aware. So all the time I have very unfortunate cases such as yours where you learn after the fact that, you know, some individual is a true scumbag and has a series of violent convictions on his record. If you are unaware of that at the time, that could then not be introduced as evidence at trial. However, you're also in Maryland, we do have a lot of sympathy with battered spouses and the battered spouse defense.
Yeah. So actually, I have a good example of this. It's a real life scenario. Dear friend of ours, she sent her significant other to prison for quite a long time because he ultimately tried to end her. And this person is getting released soon, and she is now a concealed carry holder. And she nicknamed this person Michael Myers because he has broken into her property before. And she's worried that when he gets released, that he is going to come and find her.
It's horrifying, and that is one of the big problems of, particularly with women, just their traditional physical limitations with the duty to retreat. If the man is bigger, faster, and stronger than her, it will be difficult in a lot of circumstances to be able to retreat. And particularly, I will speak for the panel, I am very, 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 very minorly concerned about ever being raped. But as a woman, I can imagine is a far greater, justifiably so, concern. And
Still could happen.
Stop looking at me, Duane. And then,
And there's so many women that are raped by a total stranger, and then they're murdered later on. Like, they're murdered same night.
and as a woman, are you concerned with the difficulty of modern fashion carrying a firearm in a concealed fashion now that it's required under Maryland statutes?
It is very difficult with the way women's clothing is designed.
Well, that's a whole nother topic for a podcast, talking about just how do you carry, where do you carry, and with women, how does that change things? Let me ask you this. Do you, as it applies to your friends, your female friends and stuff like that, do you find that there's a shift now? Are women, at least that you know, becoming more aware of this danger and availing themselves to getting permits? Or is there really, you're not noticing very much change?
So I have several friends that also live in the city, and they've lived in the city for 10 plus years each. And they've never had an encounter like we had. And I think the most important thing about that is just being situationally aware as a woman. Like, if you're walking anywhere outside in the city by yourself, don't look at your phone, look around, make sure you make eye contact with people passing you on the street. Check the alleys as you're passing them, things like that. Those are things that they practice instinctually now that keep them safe. However, I do have one friend who is also a gun holder, but she as well is an Army veteran. So that's why she's comfortable.
She's predisposed to the comfort with firearms, whereas a lot of people don't until they have that unfortunate experience, which may change their outlook on things.
Absolutely. And when I lived in New Jersey, well, of course, the political climate there is a little different.
Not much.
No, I was in northern Jersey, like very suburban, very democratic, I should say. And I was very anti-gun for a long time. I was afraid of guns. I thought they had no place in society whatsoever. Until I joined the military, and then I became familiar with firearms, and then I understood that if you understand your weapon and how to control it, you are in control.
So you would say that fear or that belief stems from
Unfamiliarity.
Yeah, unfamiliarity. And what we're noticing, or what I'm noticing, is that the number of female clients coming through for carry permits and even HQLs is growing. They are a growing demographic. And all races of our clients. And the thing that people say is kind of like what you just said, is I would have never thought to have a gun in the house or even carry a gun, but things are changing. And in this case, you have the military thing to rely on for that. But these individuals, and they come to the classes and they're like, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I feel like I have to.
Yeah. And actually, culturally, there's been a shift with women being more comfortable being single or unmarried, because traditionally we were taught to rely on our husbands as our protectors, right? But nowadays, more people are straying from that and from the family unit, I guess. And so women want to be independent and they want to be their own protectors.
So you're saying that women tend to not want to get with men that live in their parents' basement at 40 years old, and so
Well,
they have no choice.
Or you
Well,
have
the
the
thing
ones
is-
that want to stay in the streets.
Yeah.
Well, I think men and women alike they just no longer settle for just being married to just anyone. Like, I'd rather be single than to be with the wrong person.
Do you think other women judge you for having a firearm?
Probably. I mean, depending on their political views, yeah.
My only problem with the women carrying the firearms is they always want to put the thing in their purse. And what is the first thing that somebody that's just trying to rob you, they want your purse. That's the first thing they're going to take
Well,
from you.
First of all, I don't even carry a purse anymore because I don't want something that they see that they want to take from me. My wallet is attached to my phone. So if they want that, they can have one credit card.
And that's a great point, Vinnie. I mean, that is a very good point because like you talked about in a previous podcast about those things that mount to your console and these
it's
magnetic
nonsense.
things. It is nonsense. And there is a whole market of women's concealed carry purses and they go to these classes and they push this because they make money on it.
Of course.
And they
because
don't
they can't wear it on their clothes.
Right. And so, they're teaching these women that it's okay to put a gun in your purse.
No.
It is not. It is
No,
not.
It's the first thing that's getting
No.
stripped from you.
Because what's worse is someone stealing your gun and using it illegally.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of videos now on social media of people, which is why I was never a fan of open carry. I'm not about giving somebody the goods on me before it's time, right? I want to keep it a surprise.
Right, of course.
And so there's plenty of videos out there of people that have these junk, cheap, $15 Uncle Mike's holsters.
The neoprene.
Yeah, the one size fits most, and it's just hanging precariously from their belt. And they're at a gas station, and somebody comes in from behind them, sees it, and literally takes it out of the holster and runs off with it. And so, yeah, that's a topic.
Not before they pointed at him first.
Right. Yeah, and that's a topic for a whole nother podcast. And it certainly warrants one where we could talk about holster choice and where should the holster be on your body and all of that. But all very good points.
Well, Vinnie, that's when I want to not have one in the chamber.
Yeah, true. I mean, that's another topic we can discuss as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what we call the no ready position.
That's no ready.
As a woman, do you feel comfortable using your firearm?
I haven't been in the position to use it in a real life scenario. I have used it at the range only so far.
So that.
But I mean, Vinnie, he's been carrying for years, and he's only had to use it once. How long have you been a gun holder?
I've had a concealed carry permit, I think. Well, I got to stop calling it a concealed carry permit because in Maryland it's called a permit to carry a handgun. But I've had one, I think, since 2016. Duane can probably look up the records on that.
I think it was 15 or 16 when you came through. But that brings up a very valid point, too, and it kind of allows me to talk a little bit about our force-on-force reality-based training program. So this program was developed just for what you're talking about. We took what is used in law enforcement and we brought it into the civilian realm. Essentially, we use simunitions, which is a converted gun. It's a gun that's been converted to shoot marking cartridges made either by force-on-force or simunition. Both are owned by General Dynamics, of which I'm an instructor. And we created what we call isolation drills. Now, these are simple one-objective scenarios. It's not zombie apocalypse. It's not house clearing or any of the stuff like that. And what we do is we put you into this simple isolation drill with a single objective, and we get your heart rate up, and we present you with a behavior, and we have you react to it. And people go through this, and inevitably, people that have never been through it, they get to the first scenario, which is very, very simple. The guy has a gun, he's demanding your stuff, and he raises it up, and he's going to shoot you if you don't do something about it. And what we see is a lot of freezing. I equate it to this. We see people freeze, and then you see them, they're thinking. It's like when you're loading a page on a computer and you've never loaded it before, and the wheel is turning, but you've never loaded it before. But what's interesting is the second scenario, the third, the fourth, and then when they get to the end, that decision-making process comes much quicker. And the reason is they're not familiar. It's not about marksmanship in that situation. Yes, we want to see that you get good hits, but it's more about the decision-making process. It's getting you to break hesitation, to get through the stress of the moment, because the people that come through this will say, and people that have been in real-life incidents will say that the stress that you feel is a little bit different than other types of stress you may have felt before, and it happens in milliseconds, as Vinnie said. And so we need to break the stress so that you can react quickly. The other part of that is what we call conscious effort. So this is, you've not thought about these types of scenarios before, and you're now in one, and you're going through all the thoughts of the however long we've just been talking. Can I not? So we're trying to speed up your reaction, your recognition of the threat, and your reaction to the threat. And that's what we see, is that people sometimes have a hard time, not sometimes, most people that haven't been formally trained before have some delay there. And as they go through the scenarios, they get better and better and better. And at the last scenario, it's almost perfect. And that's the purpose of that. So it's more than just going to the range. And I think you said it before on a previous podcast. It's more than just going to the range and putting holes in paper, because the paper's not shooting back at you or not attacking you.
It's not moving. Well, sometimes it is, but it's like what you're driving. Your point that you're driving home is the object or the objective is to get people comfortable being uncomfortable, is what I like to call it. Or that's a lot of people. They say, you know, like, I don't know if I could actually shoot someone, and that's honestly not a thought that goes, at least through my head, in a situation like that.
If someone truly believes that they would have a problem dropping the hammer on another human being, even if that other human being is posing a deadly threat to them, then they should really leave the gun at home.
Yeah, because they're more dangerous being paranoid about it, because they're presenting a weapon that they're not ready to use.
Yeah, and they've brought a gun, because every fight you're involved in that situation is going to be a gunfight because you brought the gun. If they take it from you, that's a problem. So you have to prepare yourself physically. You have to prepare yourself by going to the range and being proficient with your weapon, but you also have to prepare yourself mentally for the eventuality. I'm sure Vinnie came through the class, listened to what I had to say, and never assumed that he may ever need to use it, we would hope. But that day did come.
Yeah.
And
2 days of it.
Yeah.
There was one day I had it and one day I did not.
Yeah. And the first day prompted you to get the permit,
correct,
which allowed you to be able to protect yourself for the second one.
Correct. Yeah. As I said, especially if you live in a densely populated area or a major metropolitan city, especially a blue state or blue city, you're more than likely going to be faced, whether you're looking for it or not, you're going to be faced with an uncomfortable situation at some point in time. And it doesn't take long. You know, if you're a person that likes to be outside, you're active, you work a lot, you're constantly in and out all day, you like to walk, you take your dogs out, whatever the case may be. I mean, her and I, we have 2 French bulldogs together, and people were getting robbed for their French bulldogs.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was a big thing for
dog
a while.
napping.
Terrible.
Dog nap. Yeah, it was huge. It was in Maryland and DC. There was people just walking their French bulldog. They were stealing them from kids.
Well, it was across the country. What celebrity's dog was taken?
Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
And the guy was shot.
Yeah.
He was shot for Lady Gaga's dog, or dogs, wasn't it?
So that brings up another interesting question that's been asked during classes. Can I use, and I'm going to say the question and then I'm going to answer it my way. Can I use my firearm to prevent someone or another dog from killing my dog? And the problem is, Andrew, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a dog is technically property in Maryland.
It is. Just recently, they passed a bill that a dog, for better or worse, my dogs are priceless, but by statute, they're only worth up to $10,000.
So if a dog is attacking your dog, or a dog is attacking, or someone else is attacking your dog, you cannot use deadly force to defend them. Now, if a violent dog is attacking you, that may be a different story, that you can use your firearm to protect yourself from serious bodily injury or death from the attack from that dog. Thoughts?
I agree with you. And so much of it, really, when you're looking at the situation, this is a classic example. You should probably speak to a lawyer before speaking to the police. Did you feel threatened at the same time that the dog was going to attack you?
Absolutely. The dog was coming right at me.
So at that point, different situation.
He was eye level. I saw his teeth.
Did he have a firearm?
Nope. He was coming for my throat.
Did he have one of those barrels of whiskey under his?
No, I would have probably asked him for some.
The fact he had a vest that said service dog on him, but
another common place that people carry their firearms nowadays is with them in their vehicle, whether it's in the glove box, whether it's in the center console,
or where it should be on you.
Yeah, on you, correct. Everybody always asks me that. They say, well, where do you carry your gun when you drive? I said, or how do you drive with your gun? I said, I sit in the seat. And they're like, what do you mean? Isn't that uncomfortable? I'm like, no.
You don't seatbelt your gun in for safety?
And that's my rule. And I don't tell people to do this, but you know, technically it's illegal. But if I'm driving in a city, especially my own, I do not wear my seatbelt for the simple fact is you never know when you might have to bail out of that car because your car is a cage. You're trapped.
Well, and you know, wearing a gun, it's never going to feel like you've got a giant marshmallow in your pants.
No. And if it does, you're carrying the wrong gun.
Yeah.
Or you have the wrong holster. I always carry inside of the waistband, and it's very comfortable for me to. I bicycle in 5-inch shorts with inside the waistband holster.
We'll insert a photo into the final production.
Yes.
But no, that's a good point.
So Andrew, what are your thoughts on this? I'm driving through the city, and a guy with a Virginia plate and a Nissan Altima with 3 hubcaps on it cuts me off. And he's hanging me the bird out the window or whatever. And we come up to a red light. I'm jammed in traffic. And this guy jumps out of his car and starts approaching my vehicle.
The fight has not yet risen to the level of deadly force. So it would be inappropriate to draw down on him with the facts presented so far.
So, okay. So let's elevate it. Where are you going with this?
So eventually, obviously, I'm in my car. I'm technically stuck. I have nowhere to go. There's no.
You're blocked in on all 4 sides.
Yeah, I mean, I can't ram through people. You know, there's a mom in front of me with a minivan, and she's got 4 newborns in it. I don't want to crash into her van to try and get away. I don't want to run the person over to try and get away. And I'm stuck, and I don't know his intentions. I don't know if he is armed or he's coming up and he's screaming profanity, obscenities, and I'm going to F you up. I'm going to do this, you know, get out of the car. You know,
don't get out of the car.
Well, that's, 100%. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
So
you're not going to like my answer. So
I roll the window up, lock the door,
yeah,
and I'm supposed to be on the phone with 911 at that point.
Your options in Maryland are very limited. He might have a gun, but you have no indicia that he actually has a gun.
Right. Now, if he does clearly have a weapon in his hand, then obviously I think I'm answering my own question here.
Well, when you say a weapon, what?
If he has a baseball bat.
It's getting tougher.
Yeah,
it's getting tougher.
I would let me.
But I mean, this is real stuff that happens every day.
And we see this. We do see this. Let's say this. Let's say that first he's out of his car. There's no weapons visible. He's yelling at you. He's screaming at you. You can't go anywhere, but we haven't quite gotten to the level of deadly force yet. Now, let's say he produces a claw hammer from somewhere that you didn't see. He's still there yelling at you and things. Now, let's say he approaches you and starts to bust your window out with said claw hammer. Are you in fear now?
Oh, yeah, it's time to draw at that point.
Yeah. Andrew?
I would agree with you then. Let me just cloud the scenario. You're in the driver's seat. He is at 2:00 on the other side of the vehicle, and he smashes in the passenger side door.
I would wait for his head to come through the window.
So we're at malicious destruction of property at this point,
so
right?
It's a property crime. In Maryland, you cannot use deadly force for defense of property.
So if he comes through my window, though, his head and his shoulders he's in my vehicle at that point.
Then I would certainly believe you'd be able to articulate the threat, particularly the fact he has a claw hammer and he's smashed the window. Let's go back to the earlier scenario. If he has a baseball bat and he proceeds to smash your headlights, walk around the vehicle, smash your taillights, knock both your mirrors off.
I just get to turn the radio up?
Yes.
Okay.
In Maryland, that would be the outcome. As goofy as that may seem, that's the outcome legally in Maryland.
It's the point where you are actually in immediate fear of serious bodily injury or death. He's crawling through the car from the passenger side, getting ready to strike you with the claw hammer. I think that's pretty cut and dried. He's at the driver's side. Let's change it to the driver's side. He's busting out the window and your head's right there. I think that's a little different.
If he is with the claw hammer, but attempting to just open your door using the handle and the door is locked, I think you're in a very precarious situation in Maryland.
Because he did not gain entry to me. There was still a barrier in between him and I. And you know, I had a window, I had a door. The door was locked, the window was rolled up. Now, if he takes my cover per se, by busting the window, then now he has access to me and to get into my vehicle where I am sitting like a little duck.
And then let's go back to the one argument that you know a prosecutor is going to raise. If he is smashing your passenger side window and trying to crawl in, why didn't you be prepared for this question?
Get out and
why
run.
didn't you get out and run? I don't make the law, but that is what someone is going to ask.
Well, I would just, I would say, hey, I got a bad hip or something, whatever the case may be.
Well, I mean,
Well,
the
what
duty
if-
to retreat still applies.
Well,
Yeah.
what if you start to drive away and he's hanging out of your car? Is that
That's-
like
He's
that's
deadly force?
That's a him kind of problem, I think.
I mean, would you be justified if he gets hurt?
I would take that case any day.
Yeah.
He's
Representing-
responsible for
He
his own
inserted
injuries.
himself.
Yeah.
He inserted himself into that situation, literally.
Maryland is a contributory negligence state on the civil side, and he contributed to the negligence that harmed him. And then this scenario you're presenting is going to be the classic one where there is going to be a third party, probably videotaping, and you are going to probably get tunnel vision, and the video is going to show the van in front of you driving away, and the prosecutor, and hopefully not, but members of the jury are going to say, how did you not notice the van drove
Yeah,
away,
you were
and why
clear.
didn't you just drive away?
You could have drove off.
So in Maryland, vehicles are not your home. Now, someone's going to say, what about an RV I live in or something like that? That's going to be a different situation. The vast majority of us do not drive RVs around that we live in.
Okay, let's cover one last one really quick. I'm on the highway, and this person is a complete, absolute maniac. We're doing 65 miles an hour, and they're actively trying to ram me off of the road.
Yeah, we want to try to not use firearms from a moving vehicle as best as possible. I think the articulation is going to have to be that that you had no other options.
Because what I'm saying is, like, me personally, I know I can't do that, but there's people out there that will do that. They will say, well, my life was in danger. He was trying to crash me off the road at 65 miles an hour. So of course I dumped 15 rounds at him in the middle of rush hour traffic.
and hit a bunch of other cars and all this other stuff.
Wasn't there, I think it might have been a case that you guys had where I think it was on 695 at Golden Ring. There was a road rage incident, and the guy was in front of the other car, stopped on the Route 40 exit ramp, and got out of his car on dash cam and just started walking up to the other vehicle with his gun.
Believe it or not,
driver.
those types of situations these days abound. So again, though, no two situations are the same. It all comes down to if escape, if duty to retreat was in play. Did you have no other options? Was what you did reasonable? And were you in fear? And was that fear reasonable?
Years ago, a very prominent Baltimore citizen heard his car alarm going off, retrieved a firearm, went outside, caught some youth attempting to steal things out of his car. He was the one who ended up spending months in jail.
So, Andrew, what can you tell us about the trends, the legal trends that you have seen or are aware of from people using deadly force to protect themselves? Is it always a monumental task for them to prove themselves as their actions as reasonable, or are people's fears somewhat misguided?
In the metropolitan areas in the state of Maryland, you are almost certainly going to be charged in a deadly force situation. You are going to be second-guessed. I just had one recently where a drug-addicted brother was breaking into the house, and he was shot, and the individual responsible for the shooting was charged and was facing a significant amount of time in prison. I have had cases in the more rural areas of the state. Even in those situations, what I perceive to be a clear case of self-defense and what the jury ultimately agreed with me on, I've had individuals charged. In Maryland, probably with the exceptions of the far western parts of the state and far eastern parts of the state, you have to be prepared to be charged criminally if you use a firearm, even in self-defense. Unless it is the most open and shut case of self-defense, there are going to be problems almost certainly.
Because Maryland, they're just going to be like, oh, well, let's go ahead and charge them and we'll figure it out later.
Yes. And obviously also be prepared that they are going to scrutinize everything you did, and also for technical violations at the same time. Be prepared to be charged with it.
That's why I tell everybody, don't put any stupid shit on your gun. Like, the Punisher skull or, FAFO.
Infidel.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Smile and wait for flash.
Yeah, all that stupid stuff.
All that stuff's going to get you in trouble.
And be prepared where, your firearm was not properly concealed at the time you used it.
Yeah.
This was a dispute over property, so deadly force wasn't appropriate. You were the initial aggressor. Everything you do is going to be second-guessed, and the incident, as you described, that is going to take milliseconds to seconds, when played on 1,000th speed, it's going to look like you had 10 minutes to make a decision.
Correct. That's all everybody sees.
So, Andrew, for the wrap-up, some final guidance for our listeners.
The Second Amendment is a very powerful right, and every citizen should, if they want to and are capable of, possess a firearm, and under our current jurisprudence, they have a right to have a carry permit. At the same time, with that comes tremendous responsibility. And in a state like Maryland, judicially, they are going to be very, very, very unfavorable to the use of a firearm in self-defense. At the same time, I'm not willing to die tomorrow if I'm accosted by someone who means me or my family harm. But at the same time, when it comes to these situations, be very judicious with your actions. I know it's going to be a very uncomfortable situation, but that's why it's so important to get the appropriate training that your decisions are beyond reproach.
Thank you, Andrew. So as we wrap up, I want to thank you for tuning in. Please remember to comment, share, like, and most importantly, subscribe. It only takes a second and it really helps us out. Stay tuned for our next episode by hitting that notification bell, and you'll be notified every time new content drops. If you're interested in our firearms training program, the link will be in the description below. So for the Urban Defense Podcast, I'm Duane Urban, along with Andrew Saller and our guests. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, knowledge is mental ammunition, and train, fight, and win.